So here's how it starts. No apology, no reckoning, just a subtle shift in tone. One day you'll look up and you'll hear them say, "I've always been a traditional conservative." And just like that, the pivot begins. The hats come off, the slogans fade, the firebrand rhetoric quietly retired, replaced with buttoned-up sound bites about limited government and personal responsibility. Suddenly it's all Reagan this and Goldwater that. They'll start talking about balanced budgets, family values, and how deeply they respect the Constitution. But don't be fooled. This isn't a return to principle. It's not a crisis of conscience. It's a PR maneuver. They've seen the writing on the wall. The Supreme Court may have handed Trump broad immunity, but public opinion isn't as forgiving. Corporate donors are backing away. Suburban voters are done being embarrassed. And younger generations, they're not buying it anymore. MAGA, once their badge of honor, has become a political liability. So they're shedding it like a snakeskin. Not because they've changed, but because the winds have. They know if they hang on to the MAGA brand now, they're going down with the ship. So they're trying to reintroduce themselves, not as foot soldiers of a failed movement, but as thoughtful, measured, real conservatives who were just misunderstood. They're rewriting their roles in real time, turning years of cheerleading into selective amnesia, hoping no one notices the abrupt change of costume. But make no mistake, this isn't a clean break. It's camouflage. It's survival. Then comes the distancing act, the great disavowal. It was Trump, they'll say. He misled us. We didn't know what he was all about. Like he was some political con artist who fooled a nation of seasoned lawmakers. Like they were just naive patriots caught in a momentary lapse of judgment. They'll act shocked that it all went sideways, as if January 6th arrived without warning, as if they hadn't spent years echoing his talking points, amplifying his lies, turning conspiracy into campaign strategy. They'll pretend the racism was an aberration, the authoritarianism a misunderstanding, the contempt for democracy just bad optics. But the truth? It's always been there. From the very first birther lie to the final plea to find 11,780 votes, they saw it, they heard it, they chose it. More than that, they enabled it. They fundraised off it. They voted with him nearly every time. They wrapped themselves in his aura because it worked until it didn't. Now that the tide has turned, now that the brand is toxic and the legal walls are closing in, they want to wash their hands of it. They want to pin the entire collapse of American political integrity on one man. They'll want to say, well, he went too far. We were just trying to get judges confirmed. Or, we didn't think he meant it literally. But here's the expanded reality. You don't get to cheer on the fire and then pretend to be a bystander once the house is in ashes. You don't fan the flames of anger and fear to power a base, only to act shocked when the base storms the Capitol. It wasn't just Trump. It was an entire ecosystem, a chorus of enablers. And then there's Project 2025, a 900-page radical blueprint drafted by Heritage Foundation alum, many of whom now serve in the administration. Trump repeatedly claimed ignorance, calling the document abysmal. Meanwhile, a time analysis found that nearly 2/3 of his early executive orders mirror Project 2025 proposals, eliminating federal agencies, curbing DEI programs, shifting FEMA costs to the states, overhauling regulatory oversight. Russ Vought, John Ratcliffe, and others who worked on Project 2025, now occupy top posts in this administration. Even key MAGA ideologues are now distancing themselves. Marjorie Taylor Greene, long a staunch Trump ally, has publicly criticized GOP leadership for abandoning America First principles, especially over Gaza, EPA nominations, releasing the Epstein files, and internal betrayals. Other Republicans, like Anthony Scaramucci, Mike Pence, and groups like Principles First, are increasingly signaling ideological rupture. They worry that MAGA's brand is morphing into a narrower, more doctrinaire movement, potentially more extreme than Trump ever was. Yet, Trump persists, flexible, transactional, sometimes contradicting the core MAGA dogma. That tension fuels the disavowal campaign. Let Trump bear sole blame, while the broader political toll goes unaccounted for. But history, not to mention the public, won't let them off that easily. And neither should we. Behind the scenes, the cleanup is already underway. The digital erasers are out. The memory holding begins. Quiet, methodical, and deliberate. Watch their social media feeds. Scroll back far enough and the trail starts to vanish. Tweets calling Trump the greatest president of our lifetime. Gone. Selfies from the rally wrapped in flags and grinning in red hats. Gone. That Facebook post calling dissenters traitors, accusing the media of treason, or suggesting civil war might be justified, yeah, they're gone too. The MAGA hashtags disappear. The bios change. America First becomes faith, family, and freedom. The red hat vanishes from their profile pictures, quietly swapped out for a bald eagle or a child's baseball game. They're not rewriting history in speeches. They're unpublishing it, silently, strategically, because they know the receipts are out there. Screenshots, archive.org links, FEC donation records, news clips of them nodding behind Trump at rallies, Pfluger, smiling as he threatened his enemies on live TV. They're hoping the internet forgets, hoping we forget. Because what looked like loyalty then now reads like complicity. And what once played as patriotic fervor now feels like a precursor to something darker. This isn't just vanity, it's self-preservation. They want plausible deniability for the next chapter. They want to walk into polite society again, sit on corporate boards, give speeches on leadership, get rebooked on CNN as principled conservatives. Some are even testing a new political persona. Tough but fair, post-partisan, concerned about extremism on both sides. But MAGA's a stain they're trying to bleach out of the fabric, quietly, before the cameras notice. And let's be clear, this isn't the first time we've seen this. After the Iraq War collapsed, suddenly no one supported it. After the financial crisis, suddenly no one backed deregulation. And now, after Trump's third indictment, after the Supreme Court granted him sweeping immunity, after the release of the Project 2025 playbook, after polls showed suburban women peeling away, suddenly MAGA was always someone else's idea. They're scrubbing the record, not out of remorse, but because the backlash is real. Because corporations are nervous, suburban voters are fleeing, and some donors are quietly reassessing their investment. They're hoping you don't remember the podcasts, the tweets, the interviews. They're hoping you don't remember the violence, the hate, the silence when it mattered most. But we remember. So check the archives, save the screenshots, back up the receipts. Because history has a tendency to repeat itself when the guilty get to edit the last draft. Next up, they'll try to rewrite the meaning of MAGA itself. They'll say it was never about Trump, never about insurrection, Never about white grievance politics or dismantling democratic norms. Oh, MAGA just meant wanting better jobs. It was about loving America. What's wrong with that? They'll recast it as a misunderstood Hallmark card. A little loud, a little messy, but ultimately heartfelt. And then, right on cue, they'll blame the fringe. They'll say it was a good movement until it got hijacked by trolls, by LARPers, by nameless extremists who definitely weren't them. They'll point to the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the QAnon diehards, and say, we never wanted that. As if they didn't wink and nod when the chaos grew louder. As if they weren't retweeting the memes, sharing the conspiracy, selling merch off the outrage. They'll pretend the whole thing was just a branding error, a messaging misstep. As if the chance of lock her up and send them back were bad PR, not campaign strategy. But let's be clear. MAGA wasn't a neutral slogan. It wasn't just a red hat or a flag on the truck or a catchy line on the podium. It was full-blown political identity, forged in grievance, fueled by paranoia, aimed squarely at the pluralism this country was built on. It drew its energy not from hope, but from resentment. Resentment of immigrants, of black voters, of women, of coastal cities, of teachers, of scientists, of anyone who challenged the myth of a fallen golden age. It wasn't about fixing the system. It was about punishing the people they believe stole it from them. And the proof? It's everywhere. In the politics, the rhetoric, the threats, the lawsuits, the lies, the violence. They don't get to chant, stop the steal, threaten election officials, demand military takeovers, mock the disabled, dismiss a deadly pandemic, call journalists enemies of the people, and then tell us this was all about bringing jobs back to Ohio. This wasn't a campaign that got away from them. This was the campaign. This was the movement. They built it. They nurtured it. They fed it. And now they want to repackage it in soft-focused nostalgia. They want MAGA without the bloodstains. They want the base without the baggage. But the record doesn't lie. The videos are still online. The tweets are archived. The books were published. The rallies were broadcast live. And let's not forget, the Supreme Court just granted Trump legal immunity for official acts. He now says he won't rule out using the military against dissent, like in LA or Chicago. Project 2025, his team's own roadmap, calls for mass firings, expanded presidential power, and new loyalty tests for civil servants. This is the logical endpoint, not a deviation, but a destination. So when they try to reduce MAGA to a misunderstood bumper sticker, they're not offering clarity. They're laundering history, trying to turn a dangerous movement into a nostalgic brand so they can keep the machinery of power and ditch the consequences. But MAGA wasn't hijacked. It arrived exactly as advertised. Don't be surprised when they suddenly rediscovered their independence streak. All of a sudden, the same people who marched in lockstep with Trump, who rode the MAGA wave like it was a golden escalator or to permanent power, will start pointing at their own one moment of hesitation, their one tweet, their one vote, their one carefully worded op-ed that maybe kind of questioned him. Well, I opposed him on tariffs. I thought that the Helsinki press conference was a little much, or the classic. I had real concerns after the first impeachment. I just didn't think the timing was right. It's coming. In interviews, in memoirs, on the Sunday shows. The footnotes of dissent, polished up like battle scars. They'll treat these tiny flickers of disagreement like they were mighty acts of political courage. They'll say, see, we were never fully on board. as if a single hedged objection somehow cancels out years of loyalty, hundreds of votes, dozens of rallies, thousands of public statements and sound bites that told a very different story. But here's the thing. They never walked away. Not when the Muslim ban was signed. Not when children were torn from their parents at the border. Not when peaceful protesters were tear-gassed for a photo op. Not when he threatened to jail his opponents. Not when he told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. Not even when he tried to overturn the results of a Democratic election. They didn't stand up to Trump when it counted. They stood with him again and again. Through both impeachments, through COVID denialism, through the Capitol insurrection, through attacks on the press, the judiciary, the military, even his own vice president who he tried to hang. Their moments of disagreement didn't stop them from endorsing him, didn't stop them from campaigning for him, didn't stop them from pushing his judicial nominees, his executive orders, his worldview. And it sure didn't stop them from lining up behind him in 2024, long after the truth was plain. Because when it came down to it, they made a choice. They stayed inside the tent. They rode the wave to cash in and keep quiet and hope the storm would pass. And now that he's insulated by Supreme Court immunity, now that Project 2025 is sparking backlash, now that swing voters are paying attention, now that corporate donors are pulling back, suddenly they're historians of their own doubt, eager to unearth some offhand remark, some long-forgotten subcommittee vote, some private misgiving as if it were a firewall against accountability. But token dissent is not resistance. One disapproving murmur doesn't erase a decade of complicity. It's political insurance, filed too late, and worth nothing at the claim window. They didn't stop him. They backed him. And history won't confuse a nervous footnote with a principled stand. And finally, we come to the fallback line, the last refuge of the opportunist. I was just going along to get things done. You'll hear it everywhere now, from congressional veterans to party operatives, from pundits who held their nose like David Brooks, to donors who wrote one more check after January 6th. They'll say, sure, Trump was a bit much, but we got the judges. Or, I didn't like the tweets, but the tax cuts were crucial, the ones for the rich. Or the all-purpose escape hatch. We had to stay at the table. If we'd walked away, it would have been worse. As if all this was just negotiation. As if the last 10 years were about marginal tax rates, not democratic survival. They'll paint themselves as reluctant realists, torn, conflicted, civil-minded patriots doing the hard work in a tough moment. But that's not pragmatism. That's moral cowardice, dressed in strategy's clothing. They weren't powerless. They were protected. They weren't forced. They were favored. They had leverage. They had microphones. They had platforms from which they could have warned us. And instead, they stayed in the room. They nodded along. They cast the vote, Murkowski. They helped normalize the abnormal. They spun chaos as disruption and cruelty as toughness. They said, focus on the policy, not the person. But the policy was the person. And when the lines were crossed again and again, the Muslim ban, the family separations, the purge of inspectors general, the hush money trial, the pardons for loyalists, and all the January 6th insurrectionists, the attempt to overturn the election, the violence on January 6th, the open threats to prosecute opponents in 2025, the Supreme Court's green light of near total presidential immunity. They didn't walk out. They leaned in. They got the tax cuts for the billionaires, They got deregulation for the corporations. They got the judges who are overturning democracy, including 3 Supreme Court justices now shaping Trump's second term. And now, as Project 2025 begins to roll out in full, as civil service jobs are purged, as journalists are smeared as domestic threats, as federal agencies are gutted in the name of efficiency, now they want a do-over. They want to be seen as cautious navigators, steering through a storm. But enabling extremism is not statesmanship. It's not wisdom. It's not maturity. It's not strategy. It's the easy road. And it led us right where we feared. With institutions hollowed out, public trust in ruins, and the political culture that treats the truth as optional, as long as the check's clear and the donors stay happy. So when they say, I was just trying to be pragmatic, what they really mean is, I was willing to look the other way as long as I got what I wanted. Murkowski. And now they want forgiveness without reflection. They want reintegration without accountability. They want redemption without ever admitting the role they played. But you don't get to play the accomplice and then plead technocrat. Not when the stakes were this high. Not when the damage was this deep. This is the playbook. We've seen it before, with Nixon, with the Iraq War, with every failed crusade that left the nation damaged and disoriented. When the consequences became undeniable, when the costs became too high to ignore, suddenly no one remembers being involved. Suddenly everyone was just asking questions, just following orders, just trying to make it work. They'll say, it wasn't my idea, it wasn't what I meant. Or the perennial favorite, that wasn't real conservatism. And then the pattern begins. Scrub the past, rewrite the story, find the scapegoat, build a buffer between what they did and who they now claim to be. But truth doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. And history doesn't self-destruct. There are receipts. There are videos. There are votes. There are speeches, editorials, interviews, campaign ads, photo ops, and silences. All of it documented. And more than that, there are people who lived through it, who watched it unfold in real time, who remember what was said and done and what wasn't. We can't afford amnesia. Not again. Not after this. Not when the damage is still happening. Not when Project 2025 is no longer a threat, but a policy manual in motion. Not when the Supreme Court has just made official acts a shield for authoritarian ambition. Because when we forget, we forgive without truth. We leave the door wide open for it to happen again. Different name, different slogan, same rot beneath the surface. So no, we shouldn't erase. We shouldn't move on just because it's awkward. We shouldn't let the architects of this moment slip quietly back into respectability. They made choices. They held power. They shaped outcomes. And if they want redemption, let it begin with accountability. Let it begin with truth. Let it begin with the long, uncomfortable work of facing what they helped build. Because history only erases itself when we stop paying attention. And we're not done watching. Not yet.